Does anyone have any Skinwalker stories?
Marcus, a civil engineer who had been contracted for a bridge survey on the Yakama Indian Reservation. Being a man of science and blueprints, Marcus didn't put much stock in the superstitions his local crew whispered about. He rented a secluded, aging trailer on the outskirts of Toppenish, right where the open valley gives way to the dense, suffocating climb of the ponderosa pines. For the first week, the silence was his friend, but on a Tuesday in November, the atmosphere shifted. The local fauna, the coyotes and owls that usually provided a nightly soundtrack, went completely silent. Around 1 a.m., while Marcus was hunched over his laptop, a sharp, melodic whistle cut through the cold air. It wasn't a bird, it was a human whistle, and it was performing a perfect, three-note refrain that Marcus had been humming to himself while making coffee earlier that afternoon. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty trailer. He crept to the window and peeled back the thermal curtain. Standing just past the perimeter of his porch light was a figure. At first glance, Marcus felt a wave of relief. It looked like his site foreman, Mr. Henderson, right down to the frayed baseball cap and the neon-orange safety vest he wore every day. But as Marcus reached for the door handle to ask why his boss was at his home in the dead of night, he stopped. The man was standing perfectly still, too still. No swaying, no blinking, no visible breath in the freezing air. Then, the figure moved. It didn't walk, it loped. Its knees appeared to snap backward with every step, the sound of popping joints audible even through the trailer's walls. As the entity entered the light, the safety vest didn't look like fabric anymore. It looked like a bioluminescent, fleshy growth that had fused to the creature's torso to mimic the clothes it had seen Henderson wearing. The face was the worst part, a melting, doughy approximation of a human countenance, where the eyes were just wet, black voids. Marcus backed away, his heart hammering against his ribs. For the next 5 hours, he sat in the dark. He listened to the creature circle the trailer, its long fingernails shrieking against the metal siding like a lid on a coffin. Every few minutes, it would speak in his own voice, calling out from the darkness, "Marcus, buddy, I forgot my keys. Just pop the latch, will you?"
In the heart of the Navajo Nation, near the towering stone arch of Window Rock, a user named Leo recounted a summer spent at his grandfather's sheep ranch. His grandfather was a traditional man who followed the old ways, which included a strict rule: after the sun dips below the horizon, the curtains are closed, the doors are barred, and you never, under any circumstances, answer a voice calling from the dark. One sweltering August night, Leo was sitting on the porch, enjoying a rare breeze while his grandfather slept. The desert night was thick and heavy. Suddenly, from a dense thicket of sagebrush about 50 yards away, he heard a familiar voice. "Leo, honey, come here for a second. I've dropped my keys in the sand and I can't see a thing." It was his mother. The tone was identical, the same maternal lilt, the same slight rasp she got when she was tired. But Leo's mother was at home in Albuquerque, a 3-hour drive away. Leo felt his skin crawl. He remembered his grandfather's warnings about the Yi-Naldloshi. He didn't answer. He didn't even breathe. A moment later, the voice called out again, but the mask was slipping. The pitch spiked unnaturally high, and the words were stretched out, as if a record player was losing power. "Leo, Kumi here, Mu MMM needs you." Leo scrambled inside and locked the deadbolt, waking his grandfather. The old man didn't ask questions. He simply grabbed a pouch of mountain tobacco and began to pray in Navajo. Leo peeked through a sliver in the window. A creature emerged from the sagebrush. It looked like a coyote that had been put into a rack and stretched. Its fur was patchy and matted with dried blood and filth. It stood on its hind legs, its front paws dangling like limp, human hands. It didn't have a canine snout. Its face was flat and pale, and as it turned toward the house, its eyes caught the light. They weren't animal eyes, they had white sclera and pupils that burned with a hateful, sentient intelligence. It paced the porch for nearly an hour, sniffing at the door frame with a wet, heavy sound, before finally letting out a hooting laugh and disappearing into the desert. The next morning, they found human footprints in the dust, but each stride was nearly 12 feet apart, suggesting a speed no man could reach.
Gallup is a gateway to the high desert, and the stretches of old Route 66 that parallel the interstate are notoriously lonely. A long-haul trucker, Dave, shared a story about a midnight run that forced him into early retirement. Dave was hauling a refrigerated trailer toward Arizona at 3 a.m. The road was a ribbon of black asphalt illuminated only by his high beams. On a particularly desolate stretch, he saw a hitchhiker standing on the shoulder. The man was wearing a massive, heavy sheepskin cloak, which struck Dave as odd given the lingering daytime heat. As Dave roared past at 65 miles per hour, he glanced in his side mirror. The man wasn't standing anymore. He was running. The figure dropped to all fours and began to gain on the semi-truck. Dave watched in sheer horror as the hitchhiker accelerated, its limbs moving in a blurred, spider-like fashion. Within seconds, it was pacing the driver's side door. Dave looked down and saw a face that haunted his dreams for years. A man's face, but the jaw was unhinged, hanging too low, and the skin was stretched so tight over the skull that it looked like parchment. The creature began to tap on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic and calm. Dave pushed the truck to 75, then 80 miles per hour. The creature didn't fall behind. It matched his speed effortlessly, its head turned 90 degrees to stare directly at him through the window. Dave remembered the stories he'd heard at truck stops: never look them in the eye. If you look into their eyes, you give them a map to your soul. He fixed his gaze on the road ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. The tapping turned into a violent pounding that shook the entire cab. Just as Dave saw the distant, neon glow of a 24-hour truck stop near the border, the creature let out a sound, a mix of a woman's scream and a dying rabbit's shriek, and veered off the road, leaping over a barbed wire fence with a single, impossible bound. When Dave pulled into the well-lit station, he was shaking so hard he could barely set the air brake. He got out to inspect the truck. The heavy steel of the door was covered in deep, jagged gouges that looked like they had been made by industrial shears. Stuck in the window sill was a clump of coarse, gray hair that smelled so strongly of sulfur and decay that Dave threw up on the pavement. He never drove that route again.